Hi, everyone. This is Lynn Crawford with Hope Dementia Support, and I am delighted to introduce you to Laura Wayman, the Dementia Whisperer, who will be discussing behavior as communication. And first of all, I would really appreciate it, Laura, if you would tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Of course, I would love to. I am an internationally renowned dementia care expert known as the Dementia Whisperer. I'm the author of a best-selling book published by Johns Hopkins University Press, and my mission is to raise dementia awareness, which is what I am going to help you all with tonight so that you can better understand why behaviors are a part of communication. So I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint. Here we go. I think everybody can see that probably. Let me start it from the beginning.
And I'm going to remind everyone that if you have questions, you can put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we will be sure that all of your questions are answered by the end of the presentation. And with that, I'm just going to let Laura go forward.
Okay, thank you so much, Lynn. And I am so honored to be in front of all of you, whether you're a family caregiver, a professional caregiver, you've been a caregiver, you simply want to know more about dementia. That is what we're going to talk about today. I also have a dementia support group online called the Dementia Lifeboat that we'll talk about at the end. But I truly want to appreciate Hope for having me here, Julie and Lynn for asking me to come and share this so important message today. So we're going to start with talking about busting some myths that we've all heard over our lifetimes. So when I say, how does most of our society perceive dementia? When we hear that word, what is the first thing that usually comes to our mind? Well, of course, we've been taught to look at memory loss. We call our dementia care communities memory care. We call some of our senior centers memory cafes. Well, what I want you to start to look at now is I'm going to lift that veil of confusion and start to have you look at dementia through some very different ways. So, I also want to talk about all the extensive emotions and feelings that go along with being a caregiver. So, how does it feel to realize that your loved one has progressive loss and showing dementia symptoms early on, and the denial and the guilt and just that overwhelm, watching your loved one, whether they're your mom or your dad or your grandparent, your brother, sister, uncle, spouse, anyone you love struggle with increased loss can be truly shocking. And this is such a life-changing event. If this has entered into your life, wherever it is coming from, it is so, so life-saving, so life-changing. So I want to help you all be dementia experts. That's what helps us to manage this, to have a feeling of empowerment and control, which is important as a caregiver because this can be a very, very long road. So I'm going to start by telling you a story. I'm going to tell you the story of Peggy. Many, many years ago, when Peggy was only 17, she was a very shy teenager. She really did not want to socialize. She'd rather sit in her room and read a book and just, she was okay with alone time. She was very awkward in social situations, and she just really didn't feel comfortable However, she lived in this big agriculture and farming area. And all the farmers and ranchers and their families would get together once a month for a good old fashioned square dance, a hoedown. Everyone talked about it, looked forward to getting together as a community. Not Peggy. Like I said, she was shy. She would resist going to this once a month square dance. Now, Peggy's girlfriends decided that was enough. She was a young, beautiful teenage girl. She needed to get out, have a good time, let her hair down a little bit. So they decided, her girlfriends decided she needed to go to the dance on this particular night. They got her all gussied up. They pushed her into the square dance hall that night, and there happened to be a guest square dance caller, a young man from one of these communities that Peggy had never met before. His name was Jack. This young man was calling the dance that night. And so when Peggy's girlfriends pushed her into that square dance hall that night, Peggy looked up, saw Jack, said to her girlfriends, "Oh my goodness, that man is so handsome. I'm going to marry that man." Then her girlfriends laughed because they knew how shy she was, and they said, "Oh, you won't even go talk to him." But you know what? Peggy walked up and introduced herself and was seen talking with Jack throughout the whole evening and flirting with him. So before the end of that square dance that night, Jack asked Peggy out on their first date. Now they began to date over the next year, fell madly in love. So on Peggy's 18th birthday, Jack and Peggy eloped. Now they had a long, magical, wonderful life together. They had, in the first few years of their marriage, they had 5 healthy babies. And Peggy found that she was a true caregiver at heart. She loved caring for babies and raising children. She loved it so much, she began to invite foster children into her home. And every one of the 20 foster children that she helped to raise all had special care needs. Peggy just had a gift for caregiving. It was really, she had this heart for caregiving. She could always figure out how to care for these children as she raised them. And she never missed a beat, whether it was they needed emotional care or spiritual care or physical care. She always was there for them. And she did successfully raise over 20 foster children alongside of her own 5 healthy children to young adulthood. They began to leave the home one by one, and now Jack and Peggy were beginning to plan for their retirement dream lifestyle. They talked about all their married life because by now they were getting up in years. They had raised all these children to adults. So when that last adult child was finally launched off into life because Peggy was so successful making them into self-sufficient adults, even with their challenges, when that last child was off and Jack and Peggy were on their own, they sold their house, bought an RV, and began to travel all over the United States. Now, keep in mind, by now, Jack and Peggy were up there in years because it took a while to get all those kids all taken care of. But they had looked forward to that for so long. Unfortunately, it wasn't long before Jack's health began to fail. At first, it was macular degeneration, which Peggy could take over the driving and help with his vision impairment. But what she was concerned about is he also began to show signs and symptoms of dementia. You know, when we reach the wonderful age of 65 and older, we have a 50% chance of having some cause of dementia symptoms. And Jack was at that point where he began to show these dementia symptoms. And this was very concerning for Peggy because she had seen many of her friends and even family members who were on their own dementia journey. She knew how challenging this was. She also knew that for most causes, there was no cure and no prevention. So as Jack's dementia symptoms began to really show and he began to experience challenges with this, Peggy gathered him up, took him to their family physician, and they both received the devastating diagnosis that Jack indeed had Alzheimer's as the cause of his dementia symptoms. Peggy, of course, was very concerned. Like I said, she knew there was no prevention, no cure, no medication. She knew that everything was going to fall on her as the caregiver. And she also, because she was so sensitive, such a intuitive care provider, she knew that life on the road was not going to be helpful. Jack was going to need routine, and there was no way to stop or decrease these symptoms from getting worse. So some of his behaviors were already pretty challenging on the road. So Peggy made the decision to sell their lovely home on wheels, and she found a lovely little cottage in a retirement village next to some friends of theirs who also were retired. So Peggy could step back into that role. This was this life-changing event that took that retirement dream away from them. But Peggy, she accommodated his needs, found this little cottage, stepped back into the role of being a caregiver, one on one for her beloved spouse, Jack. Now, at first, she was doing okay. Like I said, she was just this amazing caregiver. She could just take care of all these challenges that had come up as she was raising all those kids with challenges. But Jack's dementia symptoms began to really wear her down. She looked around and realized they had made a mistake. They had moved away from any family that could have come and given them physical support. So they were all long distance, and there was no professionals in this little area where she was that knew how to help with dementia symptoms. So Peggy was, doggone it, what am I going to do? She was beginning to really feel the pressure, exhaustion, challenges from this, but she knew she had to figure this out. So she decided she was going to get emotional support by calling her adult children and just kind of venting with some of these challenges. Maybe that would help give her the strength. So she began to have phone calls with them. Even though they were long distance, they couldn't physically help her, but she was hoping for some emotional support. And quite honestly, the family was kind of shocked. They had always seen Peggy as the go-to caregiver who could figure it out. And of course, they were at that time young adults who weren't around anybody with dementia symptoms. They had no perception or understanding. So they were quite shocked, but then they were listening to Peggy and really began to be concerned as she started to explain some of these challenging behaviors. For example, now Jack's wandering. So Peggy can't take her eyes off of him for a minute or he's out the door and down the road. She even has to call the police a few times to come and fetch him and bring him home. He's not sleeping at night. He's up and down and up and down. So Peggy has to be up and down. She's literally having to sleep with one eye open because he needs constant surveillance and care. And now his brain has been so damaged by the Alzheimer's disease. Now, when she enters the room, he can no longer process who she is or why she's there. And when she tries to give him care, he's very resistant, believing she is a stranger in their own home. And he has no understanding that this is happening. He still believes he's normal. So he resists her care. As she's explaining this to the family on the phone, the family says, why don't you get some help in there? And she says, well, there really isn't any kind of help. There's not any kind of trained help to help me here. And my neighbors are all older. They have issues of their own. I'm really on my own here. So the family says, well, we'll move back and help you. Every one of them was offering to leave their career, leave their education, bring their new families wherever they were in their life. They wanted to help her, but she would always resist. No, 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 no. I'm not ready to ask you to give up your life yet. If it gets to be too much, I will alert you. Then one night, Jack and Peggy were home alone. Peggy made Jack a wonderful dinner, as she always did. But as Peggy sat down to have dinner with Jack, she suffered a massive heart attack. Now, Jack's dementia was so far advanced, he did not recognize that she needed help. In his confusion, he wandered outside and said something very disturbing to a passing neighbor that Peggy was tired. She was sleeping on the floor. So before help could arrive, it was too late. Peggy was gone. Peggy was my mother. I had to learn trial by fire the startling statistics that 68% of the time, especially a same age spouse who is trying to accommodate a loved one, give them care, and they have dementia symptoms, 68% of the time, that caregiver will get sick and go first due to the extreme burnout, the extreme demands, and they will self sacrifice because they believe they can do it on their own. So it is so important that we make the world dementia aware to understand the extent of what a caregiver must give in order to give competent and sensitive and appropriate dementia care, that they must build their village. And we as professionals need to know how to give that care and better understand, have this deeper understanding of what dementia actually is so that we can customize our care approach to relate to and fit and provide the kind of beneficial dementia care that we need to give. So, what exactly is it a dementia diagnosis? Well, I'm going to tell you right now there's no such thing. You cannot have dementia because dementia is not an illness, it's not a disease. Dementia is not a stroke. Dementia is a list of symptoms that can be caused by any one of those things I just mentioned. Dementia is this general term indicating that someone is showing us these dementia symptoms and thinking and processing is impaired enough that day-to-day functions and tasks become compromised. So stating that someone has dementia is saying that someone has pain. If you woke up this morning with pain in your shoulder, you would recognize that something has to cause you to have that symptom of pain. You don't just have pain without some cause. And that pain could be an injury or a cut or a burn or a muscle cramp, but something is causing the pain. And so perhaps you'd want to go to your physician and find out what the diagnosis, what the cause, what is causing the pain. And then your expectation is that your physician would be able to treat the cause and take care of the cause so that you could, then the pain would go away. Now, maybe there's this process, maybe they manage the pain with pain medications or heat or physical therapy, but you're still expecting that physician will eventually get to the cause, which will hopefully stop the pain symptom. Unfortunately, in the whole dementia world and the way the medical teams are approaching dementia, often when loved ones are brought in by their caregivers, and the caregiver, and we're going to talk about this here in a minute, but the caregiver describes these symptoms, then often what the medical communities are doing is looking in the wrong place for the diagnosis because they have no treatment for the diagnosis. So we're going to get into this. Just know that you can't say to somebody they have dementia. What you need to do is finish that sentence because it's incomplete. You know, my loved one is showing dementia symptoms and I know the cause because I went to the doctor. I know the diagnosis. They did a workup. I know the diagnosis. What the medical community is telling me is that he has Alzheimer's or he or she has Lewy body or has had a stroke. We're going to get into that. So let's keep that in mind. So what is dementia really? Dementia is not a name for an illness or disease or brain trauma. And it's not all about memory loss. We're going to really dive into that. Rather, dementia is a collective term that describes this broad range of symptoms, thousands of different symptoms that relate to the loss of thinking, processing, executive function, and cognitive skills, what we've learned over a lifetime. These symptoms have this horrible deteriorating effect, and they usually affect how an individual acts, how they communicate, how they engage in the day to day tasks and activities that they could engage and act out on autopilot in the past before their brain was affected. So let's dive into this. So if your loved one or anyone on a professional basis, your residents, your patients, your clients, if they have dementia symptoms that are ongoing, progressive, are getting worse over time, then there must be a cause. You do not get dementia symptoms just because you're getting older. However, getting older makes us more at risk because often these dementia symptoms don't show up for years. So the unfortunate news is that we've probably had the cause for years before the symptoms even started to be observable. So that's why we see it in older people most of the time. Now, there's over 100 different causes, over 100 different diseases or illnesses or any of these vascular events like a stroke. So there's Alzheimer's disease. And the reason why I kind of spell this out is because every one of these causes affect the brain in a different way. So we will see different dementia symptoms because of where the brain is being affected. So what I like to say is if you've met one person with dementia symptoms, you've only met one person with dementia symptoms because everybody shows it so differently. So what does that mean on the other side of that for us as that dementia aware caregiver is that we have to understand we have to customize all of our care and communication and engagement. We have to customize it to each person because everybody's loss is different. Now, there's some commonalities that we're going to talk about, but because we're all such individuals and it's really striking at the heart of us as humans, as individuals, we will see different kinds of symptoms. And I want to caution you as a caregiver, be very careful because you will hear, go to a support group, go to a training like this, you will hear somebody say, well, this works for me. And then you feel bad because you try it and it doesn't work. That does not mean you're failing. That just means you have to find a way to customize it for your loved one. So please be careful. Don't compare yourself. We can learn from each other, but don't compare yourself to another caregiver because their situation can be so different. So, number one, leading causes Alzheimer's disease. It is the most common type right now, okay? That is the diagnosis we hear most often. This causes that loss of ability to process and complete everyday tasks. Then number two is vascular dementia. That happens when reduced blood flow from a stroke or any kind of brain injury to the vascular system. There's Lewy body dementia. This can cause hallucinations, confusion, and even movement problems. Often can be at first diagnosed as Parkinson's. So we'll talk about that. There's frontal temporal dementia. This affects personality, behavior. Now, all of these are going to have an effect on certain challenging behaviors, but we're going to talk about why. But frontal temporal dementia can have some extreme challenging behaviors and language aphasia, and it's often strikes at a younger age, especially men. Let's think about Bruce Willis. And this is exactly what we're seeing with his presentation from frontal temporal dementia. He has this language challenge. He has aphasia. There's mixed dementia. Usually that's a combination of two or more types of common causes, such as Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. But I've had someone that has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's because of the combination of where this is affecting their brain and the kinds of symptoms that we're seeing. There's PCA, posterior cortical atrophy, affects the back of the brain, leading to problems with vision and spatial awareness. Now, we will see some of these in Alzheimer's disease as well, but I'm talking about kind of the initial, the first kinds of recognizable symptoms that we're seeing. Because after a certain point of time, there continues to be progressive loss. So then we will see more and more of this cross of the same kinds of symptoms happening with different causes. There's Parkinson's disease. Now, often people don't understand when they see these movement kinds of symptoms, this loss of balance and coordination, they don't understand those are dementia symptoms. And until they get that Parkinson's diagnosis, often they will argue, oh, no, that's not dementia. He remembers everything. Well, let's get that out of our head because often with any of these, memory loss, severe memory loss happens later after we see these more recognizable, once you become dementia aware, these more recognizable early dementia symptoms. There's young onset dementia. That is really related almost always to Alzheimer's disease because there is a form of Alzheimer's disease that is young onset, occurs in people under the age of 65, and that has a variety of underlying causes to the loss of these brain functions. And it usually is much more progressive, much more aggressive with the loss. Normal pressure hydrocephalus happens when excess cerebral fluid builds up in the brain, causing dementia-like symptoms. Why do they call it dementia-like symptoms here? Because with this, with NPH, it can be, if that cerebral spinal fluid is taken away, it can cause the brain to recover and not have permanent damage. So when it's dementia-like symptoms, they're presenting and they look like dementia symptoms, but they're temporary. We usually call that delusions. Okay, so there's a little bit of difference there. Huntington's disease, I have worked with those with Huntington's disease. It is a genetic disorder. They have found that to be almost 100% genetic. That causes severe movement, some memory changes, mood changes, extreme mood changes. And so it is very hard to watch. It is an extremely challenging disease. But most every one of what I'm talking about has no prevention, no cure. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. This is it's very rare, but it's rapidly progressive, and it's caused by infectious prion proteins. And so those can be introduced in very different ways. There are many of these diseases, like Alzheimer's, that we're not real sure how they get into that person's brain. It's not always considered genetic, but we're having a hard time really putting our finger on that. So you can see dementia symptoms must have a cause. And this is just a short list of the over 100 causes. So this is so complex. So I want to kind of bring this in to help us understand to manage this. So there are so many dementia symptoms that often go unrecognized, especially early on. You know, severe memory loss often develops much later. We've often, when I talk to families and help them to understand real-time dementia symptoms that can happen very early in this process, you know, they often don't, they're often looking for memory loss. And so they have a hard time seeing dementia symptoms for what they are. We can see changes in mood or behavior. We can see difficulty with balance and coordination. We can see, and difficulty with balance and coordination can cause that person to be a fall risk. And often when I'm working in assisted living and dementia care, I don't call it memory care because it's not memory care. When I'm working in assisted living and dementia care, I ask the staff in your assisted living, how many of your assisted living residents are fall risk? And they'll say, well, almost all of them. And I'll say, how many of those are showing early signs of the dementia symptom of losing their learned balance and coordination? There can be confusion with time and place. Their socialization will decrease. And there's a lot of reasons. We're going to talk about this. They might have a slight tremor. They might have trouble with familiar tasks. Now, I'm really going to highlight this here as we go because that is such a huge clue. These changes in their ability to do familiar day-to-day tasks that they've done on autopilot all their life, and they can be subtle. There's depression, there's speaking or writing problems. Often with Parkinson's, their handwriting gets smaller and smaller. For some reason, that's an early Parkinson's symptom. So dementia symptoms are going to vary depending on the cause. And depending on the cause, it's going to depend on where that brain function is being lost. So we have a picture here of a healthy brain, and you see it's full and it kind of is folding over on itself, and it has lots of brain matter and brain cells and brain chemistry. And we put a line through and we put half of an Alzheimer's brain up next to that healthy brain so we can compare what we're seeing. This brain, this Alzheimer's disease brain, it has a lot of holes and gaps in it. And look at how far away it has pulled from the skull. And look at how that damage is all over. And many of this loss starts way before we see anything that we're going to call memory loss. Because I'm going to really help you be this expert to understand this. And you may be on your dementia care journey, you may be saying, I saw that so much earlier than I realized. So we're going to talk about that here at the end. Okay, so it depends on where these causes are attacking the brain. So if the causes are attacking that frontal lobe, you can see changes in personality, decision making, the loss of ability to change how to make a decision, problems with communicating, poor judgment. You can see changes in mood, changes in personality. If the temporal lobe is affected, which it probably is at one time or another, we'll see difficulties with understanding language or speaking. Some real difficulty with raw emotion management. We'll see if the parietal lobe is in any way affected. We'll see spatial awareness, loss of ability to understand depth perception. The occipital lobe can be a huge challenge if someone's vision, and not their inability to see, but their inability to process what they're seeing and really understand what they're seeing. That's what we see as dementia symptoms, which can be very concrete or very abstract. The cerebellum, we'll see challenges with movement and balance and coordination. We can see difficulty solving problems where in the past that was just a part of who they were as a human. Problems with language, misplacing things. It's not that they forget where they put them, it's a different kind of processing about why they put that somewhere. Difficulty with simple tasks that we're going to talk about. Okay, so you see what's happening with that person's brain. What's the problem here? Because we, as a society, have been taught to look for dementia in all the wrong places. So when we see these challenging behaviors, often we don't recognize what is causing that person to communicate what they're feeling instead of being able to communicate facts or figures or things that they used to be able to talk about. So, number one early sign missed in medical visits is that loss of executive function in complex daily, day to day activities. Not memory loss, not confusion, loss of executive function. So, why are medical providers missing this? Because office cognitive tests aren't capturing real world dementia complexity. They are taught to look with MOCA and MC tests, basic cognitive functions, but they've formed it into looking for loss of memory. And it's not loss of memory, it's loss of ability to process memory normally. And then what happens, I hear this from family members all the time. You maybe have experienced this yourself. Your loved one passes the test. Maybe they're struggling a little bit, but then when they get home, they're struggling. It is so obvious that that executive function is really being affected. This requires this complex task assessment rather than the memory assessment. Patients compensate during medical visits too. Why do they do that? Because they are motivated to appear competent to the provider. And unfortunately, we love our spouse, and so often spouses or other family members answer for them. They accommodate, they think for them, which is good. We need to learn to do that, but not during these medical visits. And social skills remain intact. You know, we all have this hostess facade. If I walked up to you and said, "How are you today?" You'd say, "I'm fine." Because we have this facade, and those are the last to go. So they can cover for some of these losses. I'm fine. I'm fine. Providers focus on obvious red flags and look for severe memory loss that maybe hasn't developed yet, clear confusion that comes later. So when that family brings that loved one in and is reporting this, this is early before the complex assessments are really getting to the problem. So, what does this look like in real life? We'll see financial management becomes impossible. Checkbook balancing that took 10 minutes and now takes 2 hours, or they just can't get it done anymore. Bills get paid twice or not at all in spite of good intentions. And any complex financial decision gets avoided or delegated suddenly when it was just really on autopilot for their healthy brain. Driving skills deteriorate in subtle ways. Now, it might be that they're getting lost in familiar neighborhoods. I hear that. But you know that one of them that really surprised me is they begin to have difficulty with left turns or parking. Why? Because it takes much more brain function to make a left turn than it does to make a right turn. You have to consider oncoming traffic. You have to get in a different lane. And parking, you have to consider spatial, which you can, that is a common dementia symptom, is spatial alignment gets very, very interrupted. So they scrape the bumper next to them, or they scrape the parking block, or they that depth perception can be greatly challenged. You know, a family notices increased anxiety about driving. Unfortunately, it's not this kind of anxiety. You know, I'm not feeling very comfortable driving anymore, so I'll let you drive. It's usually not that kind. It's usually very, very anxious when they're driving, road rage, extreme anger towards other drivers, that kind of anxiety. Multi-step tasks become overwhelming. Perhaps they were a great cook, but now elaborate meals, they just can't follow a recipe like that. Or maybe they can't manage multiple medications correctly. You know, I saw my mother-in-law was really challenged with this. She had this huge medication tray. She had a very debilitating stroke. Now, she could still play bridge, but she could not manage her medications. So my brother-in-law was living close to her. He went over and he would set up her medication tray. But you know, she got to a point where she didn't believe him anymore. And she would argue with him about that. One day, after he had just been there and set up her medication tray, he came over and it was completely empty. We still don't know what she did with it. She said, well, you weren't here. So it didn't get set up. He was just there. He set it up. The next day, he set it back up. The next day, he came and she had taken all the blue pills and put them on Monday, all the red pills and put them in Tuesday. And she just said, no, you're doing it wrong. So that whole ability to think and process in a linear fashion, it was getting interrupted. But she did not know it was happening. So planning and executing social events and keeping up with a conversation in groups, these are the kinds of things we'll start to see early. So what's a better approach here? We need to ask you, the family caregivers, these exact questions. What specific tasks could your loved one can't do anymore that they could do on autopilot 2 years ago? Could be, well, they can no longer set the table. They always set the table. It could be something more obvious. They stop managing their finances, or like I said, their medications. Maybe they've gotten lost or confused in familiar surroundings. They always knew to turn right to go to the bedroom and left to go to the bathroom, but now they turn left and they have to turn around and go back because that's not working in a normal fashion anymore. Have they stopped doing activities they used to enjoy? Grandma used to do crossword puzzles. All of a sudden, she wouldn't do them anymore. No, I don't like them anymore. But she just can't process that information anymore. And we want to include all caregivers in the assessment because we're all going to see different kinds of loss because our relationships are different. So, you're the full-time primary caregiver. You see mom most of the time. But when your sister from Delaware comes to visit, she may not see the same kind of loss. And mom might accommodate a little bit more when she's visiting as well. Family members notice functional decline months before any cognitive tests that are set up detect these kinds of problems. So what I keep telling the family members, the professionals, the medical organization, when families say something's not right, they're right. They're detecting this executive function changes that our medical system right now isn't designed to measure. It can be very small, but when it increases, when it doesn't go away, when there's others, then we need to understand something is going on. Now, what are we going to do? We're going to feel denial. Of course we are. This is horrific. And so we're going to talk a little bit about getting past that. What activities become more difficult in the past 2 years? Executive function decline will predict this progressive cognitive decline better than any kind of memory test. Okay, so this is what we need to be looking at. We need to really put our thumb on these kinds of losses. So let's just go through this for a minute. This is how I like to think about how the brain is working normally and then how it's working when it's interrupted by one of these causes. So I will ask the individual something complex, such as this, the individual who's showing dementia symptoms, even if they're mild, because I will tell you they can't think linear like this anymore. I will ask him, your daughter's visiting next month. You want to take her to dinner at her favorite restaurant, then a show. Walk me through how you'd arrange that. Now let's talk about the person without dementia symptoms first. Okay, I call the restaurant and make a reservation for 6 p.m. I check what shows are playing and buy tickets online. I pick her up around 5:30. Clear, sequential, problem solving in real time. That's a healthy brain. Now let's look at how the person with or even early dementia symptoms is going to really not be able to think clearly. They'd say, oh, we'd have a lovely dinner. They immediately go to feelings. We're going to talk about that. No plan, no sequence. Then I probe, well, how would you make the reservation? Oh, I figured it out. They cannot think with details. Which restaurant? Oh, her favorite one. Back to feelings. How is it going to make that person feel? How's it going to make the daughter feel? Which one is that? Oh, they may not say I can't remember because they're afraid to say that because they've been taught to be afraid of memory loss as well. But they might say something like, um, the one that she likes. That's how they communicate now. That's the behavior we'll see. And you know what? It isn't about memory. It's about the loss of ability to think, to process, to make sense of information. And you know what? Early prevention is the key. A lot of times family members says, well, what kind of prevention? What do we do? And I say, there's lots of supplements, there's the jellyfish or whatever that might help keep your healthy part of your brain healthy. I don't know. I'm not going to argue with that, but it's not going to give you back any loss if you have one of these causes. So at this point, there's no known cure, can't give back what we lose for these dementia symptoms. However, I'm going to prescribe something no pharmaceutical company makes or will prescribe. If you're overweight, start by finding and maintaining your ideal body weight. Walk 30 minutes a day. Practice the Mediterranean diet. Get at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep nightly and manage stress actively. Now, you, the caregiver, this is your homework because it also helps that person who has lost, who already has dementia symptoms, it helps them to maintain what parts of their brain are still healthy. Doesn't stop it, fix it, or change it if they already have a cause in dementia symptoms, but it probably will help slow the loss down. I travel all over the United States and I hear from people when I go back someplace where I've trained before, they'll come up to me and say, be sure and tell the story about the cheese. That helped me, give me such a visual about what was happening in my loved one's brain. So I'm going to give you the story of the cheese. So let's imagine that our brain, if we could see in there, that a healthy brain looks like a solid wheel of cheddar cheese, dense, solid cheese. Every time we learn something new, novel, and complex, we make more cheese. And we need lots of cheese. We need cheese to think about how much cheese we need to drive a car. Sometimes when I'm driving a car, I get a little irritated because I think that there are some people who need a little bit more cheese to safely drive a car, right? Anyway, we need lots of cheese to have relationships and go to work, or we need lots of cheese as caregivers to take care of our loved ones, right? So we need this cheese. We need this executive brain function that we learn over a lifetime. And what happens when someone starts to show dementia symptoms? What is happening to their cheese? Well, the unfortunate information is that they get a dirty rat in their cheese. That dirty rat could be any one of those 100 causes. It could be Mr. Alzheimer's or Mr. Parkinson's or Mr. Vascular Dementia. We'll call it Mr. Alzheimer's today. Now, Mr. Alzheimer's in this person's brain, when it got in their brain, we don't know how it got there, but when it got there, it was years before we saw a lot of damage, and it was a hungry, dirty rat. And it ran around their cheddar cheese, taking greedy bites of cheese and leaving holes. And that is what is happening now. Their cheddar cheese begins to look like Swiss cheese. And it is so, it is so cataclysmic because now this person who's used to going and getting cheddar cheese whenever they needed it because they had it, now it's a roll of the dice whether they're going to hit cheese or a hole. When they hit the cheese that's still there, they look, act, and function normally because that executive function in that space, that cheese is still there. When they hit a hole, that's when we see these dementia symptoms because it is their brain saying, hey, that executive function isn't here. So it accommodates with these different dementia symptoms and behaviors. What it is saying, what that person's brain is saying is, hey, help me. I don't have the cheese here to do what I need to do. It is, and when they go and whether they hit cheese or a hole, they often don't feel any different either way. There's no pain involved when they hit a hole. As a matter of fact, they often don't recognize that they hit a hole. Their brain often tells them they're still normal. I saw this when I was an executive director. It just took me the longest time to figure this out because when I was an executive director in my dementia care unit, my staff, who I worked so hard to keep them trained so that we could understand what was going on and give the best care possible, they would walk up to one of my residents and they'd say, "Can I help you with a shower?" Well, honestly, the residents would get so upset. "No, I already did it," because their brain could not allow them to feel this loss. It's so horrific. And the neurological place in their brain that would know that there's loss is not working. So they still continue to believe that they are normal. That's why they resist our care so much, because their brain won't let them know that they have loss. Now, how can dementia impact even a person's senses? It impacts the brain's ability to interpret what they see. It alters depth perception. It can give them the inability to recognize color. They can be unable to process certain sounds and words, and they begin to be challenged interpreting what they hear accurately. It looks like it's hearing loss, but it's not. It's dementia symptoms. They are not understanding what you are saying any longer. They're unable to discern subtle changes in smell. They might not be able to smell smoke or spoiled food. And because they have loss of smell, it also can impact a person's ability to taste. So these decreased sensations, they can also have inability to interpret hot and cold. How many of your loved ones or patients or residents will tell you, oh, when you're trying to give them a shower, oh, it's too hot, it's too cold, and you keep feeling that it's perfectly fine. They have that inability to interpret the difference between hot and cold. All of this can be affected. So, what are we seeing when dementia symptoms are present? So, a human infant, a healthy human infant, when they come to this world, they come to us with basic brain function. Their basic brain function keeps them breathing and swallowing and conscious, and their heart beating and their blood pressure going, which is great because how would we survive as humans if every time we took a breath, we'd have to tell ourselves to take a breath, breathe. Every time we'd swallow. Now blink. Now keep your heart beating. Fortunately, we have this wonderful, amazing brain function when we're born with this healthy brain that keeps all this going. And we come with basic vision, hearing, and movement. Now, we have to learn throughout our lifetime to make sense, to understand what it is we're seeing so that we can use that information to help us. So a human infant comes with the ability to see. It's even been proven that a human infant, even just 4 hours old, can see the difference between mommy's face and daddy's face. But what does that mean? They have to learn the meaning. They have to learn because humans learn better when strong emotions are involved. We're born with these raw emotions that actually drive our ability to make sense of the world around us. So here's this human infant in mommy's arms looking at mommy's face. What feelings come up with that? Well, of course, love and safety and security. So they're going to take those raw emotions that they feel when they look at mommy's face and they feel safe and secure and loved, and they attach it to the image of mommy's face, and that's how they store that information. So when they go back later, they go back for that image of mommy's face, the feelings are attached. They stay. But I want you to understand, we don't really see with our eyes. We see things, but we don't really see until we can make sense of what we're seeing, and our brain has to do that. So we don't really see with our eyes, we see with our brain. That's how we store information. That's how we learn. And guess what? It's your brain that hears, not your ears. So let's talk about hearing. A human infant, a healthy human infant, comes to the world with the ability to hear, But the stronger the emotion, the better they learn to assess and make sense and store information that they hear. And it is very complex. For example, what does a human infant feel when they hear a loud sound? They're startled, surprised. What do you feel as a human when you hear a loud sound? The same thing, because that's how you attach that sound made you feel. And it is true with every single sound that we hear, that we store, that we find important to us. Now, right now, you are hearing many, many, many sounds that are coming out of my mouth. Many. And they're not really words until they hit your ear, and then they go to your brain for your brain to turn these sounds into words that make sense so that you can store this information and use it later. Now, my intention is that this is going to empower you to help you feel more confident and understand how the brain, a healthy brain actually works, and how it doesn't work the same when there's a cause of dementia symptoms. So that's, I want you to store this information, and then later you're going to go access this information. And I'm hoping that you will feel, oh yeah, Laura told me about that and I understood and it was so helpful. That's what I want to give you tonight. Okay, but how would you feel if you came here tonight and this is how I gave the entire presentation? Blah, 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 blah. And you hear that? But how would that make you feel? You'd want to go, oh, I'm wasting my time. I can't learn anything from this. So the sound coming out of my mouth would mean nothing to you. So you would not store that information, and you would probably feel a little annoyed that I'd taken up your time with something that really didn't mean anything. So it's important that our brain can store information that means something to us, but it has to be attached to these emotions. Oh, yeah, I do feel more empowered. I do feel more educated. No, that didn't really make sense to me. That's how it gets stored. That's how humans learn. So keep that in mind, because we're going to talk about that. And then a healthy human infant comes to us with the ability to move. They can move their head, they can move their arms, their legs, but they have to learn how to really utilize movement. They learn balance and coordination. And how does that make them feel? How does a toddler feel when they take their first steps? That self-sufficient independence, accomplishment. That also is connected to their learning balance and coordination. They attach that to that knowledge. So when they go access it later, they feel accomplished. They feel safe. They feel secure. So how is that adult who in the past they wanted to get up out of their chair and walk into the kitchen and get a cookie, now because they have Parkinson's disease that has interrupted that natural um, going and getting balance and coordination, now there's an interruption to that. So when they stand up, they fall because they can't really depend on that being there, because Parkinson's has robbed them of that feelings of safety and independence. So, then we're going to see behaviors like, they're just frustrated because they want to get up, and their brain's going to go, well, get up. And their body goes, no, that information isn't there. And so there's this conflict that goes on. And then we see these challenging behaviors, this resistance to care. The individual, as they lose this learned brain function, these feelings and emotions remain. They don't go away. So all of our emotions and feelings that we're born with, they're going to remain. But let's go all the way back to that infant again. When that infant comes to us, that healthy infant, they have these emotions and feelings, and they have small and simple ways to communicate. Their behavior communicates what they're feeling. And there's no interruption in that. It is purely, I feel this, I react this way. They haven't learned to talk themselves off the ledge or take care of their emotions themselves yet. So I'm a new mom. I have this infant. It's home and it is communicating with me that it is feeling an emotion or a feeling that I need to help it with. So I have to go through this process of elimination. Shouldn't be tired, just took a nap. I'm holding it. I've swaddled it. It's warm. It's clean. I haven't fed it for a while. What do you think it's feeling? Hungry. So I, as a new mother, would take a positive action because this infant has not yet learned to think and take care of its own emotions or feelings yet itself. It will. But right now, it just feels and reacts, feels and behaves, right? So I step in and do a positive action because I can. I have a healthy brain. I'm an adult. I've learned. So I take this positive action. I feed the baby. What if instead I tried to have a conversation with it? I mean, when you're caring for somebody, don't you want to give them choices and ask them questions? Baby, would you like the pink bottle or the blue bottle today? How do you think I'm going to make this infant feel if I begin to ask it questions or expect it to make a decision? How do you think it's going to make it feel? Are you hungry? Would you like the pink bottle or the blue bottle today? Well, of course, it's going to make the infant anxious. And it's going to continue to behave in a way that's telling you it's not happy. Because all that is going on is that they behave, the underlying trigger for all behaviors is how they're feeling in the moment. They will learn other ways to manage their emotions, but they don't have that yet. But now I look at this picture and I think, oh my gosh, that's exactly what my residence, when I was an executive director, would look like when and I taught my staff this, I taught my staff to ask questions and give them choices. Someone with dementia symptoms has lost the ability to think of an answer without a lot of anxiety because their thinker is broken. So when we ask them a question, would you like, are you hungry? Would you like dinner? Their brain immediately locks up and they feel extreme anxiety instead of us taking a positive action and thinking for them. So that is why I want you to understand they can only process in the moment because now they have basically a broken thinker. They can't think in that linear subsequent way that we were talking about earlier. So how do we learn to think for them? We change our communication and our care approach. We think for them and we keep in mind they can no longer process information other than what is in the moment. That's the other problem with asking them about choices. If I ask someone who has a broken thinker, would you like chicken or fish? Which one do you think they'll answer? Fish. It's in the moment. But I watch this happen. My staff would say, would you like chicken or fish? And the resident would go, fish. But then when they bring a fish, you know what they tell them? I didn't want that. They can only process what's in the moment. And more than likely, what you tell them, rather than them having to think and figure it out, what, oh, do I like chicken? Do I like fish? They can't do that anymore. They will just answer with the answer you give them. That's why I like to call this playing dementia Jeopardy. In the game of Jeopardy, when a healthy brain participant is playing Jeopardy, we give them the answer and they think of the question that matches. When we're working with someone who has dementia symptoms, we give them the answer that makes them feel good. Forget the question. It's all about how we make them feel. It just takes away a lot of their brain stress. I used to use Maya Angelou's quote, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you make them feel. This is the dementia aware version. Individuals with dementia symptoms cannot always process in a normal way what you say. Individuals with dementia symptoms cannot always process in a normal way what you do, but whatever you do and say will always make them feel. So be careful what you do and say. So, how do we make a positive impact? How do we become dementia aware? How do we think for them? Well, let's stop asking them questions or options because then we make them think of an answer and they have a broken thinker. It makes them anxious. We join their feelings. It's not, are you hungry? Would you like to eat? It's, I bet you're hungry. I love it when we have dinner together. We use positive action statements. A good example of that is, would you like to go listen to the music? No. Most often you will get resistance. Instead, come with me. I love it when we listen to the music together. We stay calm, confident, patient, and present in their moment. We realize and accept that we can't stop this. We can't fix it. We can't change the symptoms or the behaviors or the decline, but we can manage it because we're going to help them to feel loved, safe, secure, and valued, which in return will make them less resistant to our care. Well, we will help them manage these behaviors. We will stop making them anxious, and we will help them stay in this place where they trust us. When we join their feelings rather than making them think, they trust us because of the way that makes them feel. So, I have watched this become such a change in large communities and small communities, in families' homes, and on the internet, and doing consultations. And like I said, I have my the Dementia Lifeboat. That's an online support group, and I have my podcast, the Dementia Lifeboat Port of Call, where I interview caregivers and give them the opportunity to talk about their journey that's different. So what I'd like to do is you can take all this information about my book, about the podcast, about getting a hold of me. My email's very easy, help@laurawayman.com. But I'm going to stop the share. And what I'd like to do is see if there's some information in the chat. Is it automatically muted? Why is it so hard to tell someone who misplaces things to put it back in the same place so they don't lose it? Well, what you're doing is you're asking them to think. And so really what is helpful is if you think for them. So the way that I would probably take care of that is if it's something that is important that we don't lose, let's just say it's a TV remote. Don't carry that around. Put it back on no, I won't be able to find it. And then you'll be wanting me to change the channel and it won't be there. Why don't you have 3 or 4 remotes and just keep them in different places? So if they do put it down, you know where to go. And that way there's not this resistance or abrasiveness or conflict. What we want to do is say, you can say to them, oh, I see you have the remote. You have that. I'll let you know if I need it. Thanks for keeping that safe. Why not just tell them that? It just keeps them from getting anxious. Can you talk about balancing self-agency with thinking for them? Well, I'm not sure I understand what self-agency is, because when we begin to think, I have family members who say, oh no, I have to ask mom questions because, that's, she expects that. She's being polite. But what I see is that mom may be able to answer, but I can see kind of a cloud of confusion come over. And then when we start doing positive action, there's more of a lightness. There's more of a, it's almost the brain is going, oh, good, they didn't make me think because that's hard. So when we go out, and they can still go out to a restaurant, but they're having challenges reading a menu because it's too much information that they can't process anymore. it just makes it so much easier when we help them be successful and say, look, mom, they have your favorite chicken salad. Let's both get that. You know, that's thinking for them, but that's not being condescending. It makes them feel good. If it makes them feel good. Now, if your mom were to say, I can make my own decision, then they can make their own decision. But when you start to see this loss, that's not what they're going to say. They're going to have relief. If they aren't experiencing loss, they'll let you know. They will. So, does that answer your question? Maybe you could be a little bit more specific. Oh, good, good, good. And a lot of times family members says, no, I don't think mom's ready for that. Just try it because I'm going to tell you right now, it takes practice. We're so used to asking questions. I have to practice. I've been doing it for 30 years. I have to practice. But when a question falls out of my mouth, I'll think, how could I put that into a positive action statement? You know, Mom, I love it when you wear the blue blouse because it matches your eyes. I love this one. But I watch them struggle if I say something like, would you like to wear the blue one or the red one? Most of the time they'll say the last one because then they don't have to think. I'll wear the red. But when I say, oh, the blue one looks so beautiful, watch the difference in how they feel. Is it okay to make even someone with a healthy brain, is it okay to make them feel loved, safe, secure, and valued? Of course it is. And it's so necessary when there's this kind of loss. Okay? Is that helpful? So there's not really a line you're going to cross. It will work, I promise. I use this, and my husband laughs at me because I use this all the time because I like to watch how positive action statements make people feel. When our server at a restaurant comes over, a waiter or waitress, oftentimes they'll say, "Hi, I'm Susie, and I'm going to be helping you tonight." I say something like this. Oh, I'm so glad you're helping us. I bet you're the best server here. How do you think that makes them feel? Is that okay? Is that condescending? Of course not. Oh, thanks. I think so too. You know, for a moment, can't we give even healthy brains some moments of kindness and security and love and value? Well, it's especially important when someone has these challenges, and it just helps with that resistance, helps to keep the behaviors from escalating because we're proactive with our communication. Ask them a lot of questions, we'll see a lot of behaviors later because it just locks up their brain. That's what happens with sundowning. You know, I tried that in my organization. I said to caregivers, I was doing a lot of studying and seeing if this really made sense. And I told my whole staff, I said, for 48 hours, we're not asking any questions, only positive action statements. We're going to help family members, anybody that comes in, 48 hours, no questions because we were having a lot of sundowning later in the afternoon, that those extreme behaviors later, because our residents were communicating that we had made them think too much, right? It made them anxious. We were doing what we were taught to do. I watch my caregivers before we try this. This is what they'd say. Good morning. Would you like to get up? Would you like to have some coffee? Would you like some toast and eggs this morning? Would you like to go listen to the music? Are you hungry for lunch? Would you like to go to the activities? Would you like to wear that's and their brain was just going, oh, I can't think. It's make it. My caregivers were polite, they were kind, but it was causing such a problem. For 48 hours, we didn't ask questions. We had 98% less sundowning after that 48 hours. Those behaviors did not happen because we didn't lock up our residents' brains, asking them questions and making them think. We did positive action statements. We worked hard to make them constantly feel loved, safe, secure, and valued. And it was so successful. Okay, what does drumming your fingers while driving means? Bored, tired, or what to talk about? While they're driving, they're drumming their fingers, or you're driving and they're drumming their fingers. That probably is a brain's reaction to having to think in a complex way. You're the passenger and they're drumming their fingers. I would say that that's anxiety coming out in their fingers because their brain is having to work extra hard. So I would be a little concerned about that. I might think about asking some of those questions that we were talking about that might bring about some of this loss. Are they having problems with left turns or more complex things like parking? Or is it just a habit? So, is it a change in behavior? That's really what we wanted. Before you were concerned about any dementia symptoms, did they not drum their fingers? Is that a change? That's what we want to pay attention to. Make sense?
So, Laura, a couple of other questions.
Okay.
How can a care partner start to identify triggers or patterns behind behaviors?
So if you're seeing a behavior, you backtrack and say, okay, what did we talk about? What did they see? What did they hear? Um, that caused the feeling, because any behavior is being driven by a feeling. Any feeling is being triggered by their inability to process what they see, what they hear. If we've asked them to think and it's making them anxious, there has to be it's the triggering of the feelings. So the more we join their feelings, like let's just say at 4 o'clock, they start to pace. Have you seen dad? Where's dad? I would immediately think, are they feeling hungry? Are they feeling a sense of loss of value because they always planned meals and at 4 o'clock they need to be doing something, but they don't quite know what? So it's driven by a feeling, and the feeling is always triggered by something that they're seeing that they're not able to process, hearing that it's that inability to process why I'm feeling this way. Does that help? So the more proactive we are, Mom, it looks like maybe you're a little hungry. Come help me make dinner. Don't, are you feeling hungry? Because a lot of times they'll say no. And that makes them even more anxious.
So, what are some overlooked causes of behaviors, things that we may not immediately think of?
A lot of times it's that questioning. It's a change in routine. We're making them think. Often what I do is I will observe and I'll think to myself, when I'm observing a challenge, an extreme challenge, like they're trying to exit seek. If someone's trying to exit seek and we could ask them, where are you going? Often what they will tell us is, I'm going home. But what we need to know is their brain's perception of home is not the place, it's how home makes them feel. So when they want to go home, what does home represent to most people? Security, safety, comfort. Maybe they're in a new environment. Maybe they are home, but not feeling safe and secure because the dementia symptoms have them off balance. They're having to think too much. There's a difference in routine. They can no longer process home in the same way. So they want to get to a place where they're feeling loved, safe, secure, and valued, and their brain can't do that on its own anymore. So that's what I mean by thinking for them. So if we see these behaviors over and over again, what we need to do is to join their feelings. Okay, so does that help, or
No, I think that, yeah, I think that's helpful.
yeah,
And then, how are some ways that physical needs such as pain, hunger, or fatigue show up as behavioral changes?
it can be pacing. It can be not sitting down. It might be painful for them to sit down. It might be painful for them to stand up. They're doing, they're trying to move away from pain. If they're hungry, they'll get restless. They might go in and out of the kitchen. They might, if they're feeling lonely or abandoned, which that can happen, they might be asking for people that are no longer there or can't be there right now. They might ask a lot of questions, and that can make it worse if we try and answer with facts and figures. So if we hear, um, when's my daughter coming? When's my daughter coming? We we can buy time and say, well, she's coming after dinner. But what works better is, oh, your daughter's so beautiful. You are such a good mom. I love it when your daughter visits. Come with me. Let's go get a snack. So I talk to the feelings, and then my redirection is going to work much better because that person's going to trust me. They're going, yeah, that feels like I feel. When I talk about my daughter, that feels good. She just helped me to feel good about my daughter instead of, well, she's not coming till dinner. How's that make her feel? That makes her feel lonely and abandoned because they can't process what that means. It just doesn't feel good right now. So talking to the feelings, that positive action is what's going to calm them down in the moment. Now, can they store that? No, we have to do it again 15 minutes later because there's no place in their damaged brain to store that information. They're going to feel it again and again. And we just give them the feelings back again and again.
Can you speak to a few go-to strategies that can help de-escalate a situation in the moment?
Sure, if I am watching somebody escalate, often what helps is if I join their feelings. I can only imagine how this is making you feel. I get upset sometimes too. And you know what? I'm so glad that we can be together and feel this together. Let's go take a walk and talk about it. So I'm doing this positive action. I'm joining them. I'm allowing them to feel. I give them permission, unless they're getting really physical. Now, I have had, most often, if I've had an extreme behavior where they're being aggressive or combative, then it was allowed to escalate. Starts out small most of the time, unless there's some mental health issues underlying the dementia symptoms. That's when we need probably a different kind of professional approach because ironically, mental health challenges require a different kind of approach than dementia symptoms. Dementia symptoms, we join their feelings, we join their dementia wonderland. With mental health, it's more reality based. We bring them into our reality, and those two don't mix if there's a combination of them. But almost always, I have been able to join that person's feelings if it's dementia symptoms and de-escalate it by joining them, allowing them to feel, letting them vent, agreeing with them, even if it's not how I feel. I might agree with them. Oh yeah, I can only understand how that might make you really, really that might, it's very hurtful. Well, my daughter left me here. She thinks I'm crazy. Oh my gosh, that can be really scary, and it doesn't feel good at all. I sure am glad you're here with me today and we can share this because when I'm with you, I feel really safe. Let's go for a walk. See, I joined the feelings, right? And I agree with them. They might, if they've been placed in dementia care, or I'm not letting that caregiver come in my house. This is my house. This is my kitchen. You know what? That caregiver can learn how to be a good housekeeper. And I don't like to call him a caregiver, by the way. This is a young woman who'd like to learn how to be a good house run a household like you do. You're so good at it. They just want to come and learn from you. Do you see the difference?
Well, that's perfect because there's another question about an example of a small shift in communication that has made a big difference.
Absolutely. That is I've seen that be almost miraculous. There was a gentleman. I travel a lot, so I'm on an airplane. So I was getting off a plane, and you know how when we first land and you're getting off a plane, it's kind of slow going down the aisle. And I could see someone sitting at the older gentleman sitting in the very front, and I could see the flight attendant was really struggling. She was kind of leaning over him, asking him questions. Well, that's deadly. So when I got close, I could hear that she was saying, "Is there somebody that's waiting for you at the gate?" And he was just getting so mad. And right when I was getting close, he said to the flight attendant, because she kept asking him questions, making him so angry, he started pointing at her, going round and round and round we go. And so I sat down next to him. And I just did this. I reached up my hands and I said, "It's so good to see you." And he looked at me and he put his hands in mine. He said, "It's good to see you too." I didn't know him. And I said, "I bet someone who loves you very much is waiting for you. Come on, let's go find him." Just then, the gate person came down and said, "His daughter's waiting for him." I said, "See, your daughter's waiting. Come on, she loves you so much." And the flight attendant was going, "What?" Because he was getting really anxious. So, okay, we have another question. My wife has Capgras syndrome, does not believe I am her husband. Very difficult. Often with Capgras is that if she can't see you, but she hears your voice, she recognizes your voice, but she can't recognize your face. There's a disconnect between that. So, what I've seen with Capgras syndrome is um, you do better if you're behind her, if she doesn't see your face, even if you wear something over your face and she just hears your voice. I know that sounds very weird, but Capgras syndrome is, it's actually kind of unusual, but if that connection is broken between what you sound like, which gives her comfort, and what you look like, and she can't put those two things together, it makes her very anxious. It's very difficult. I'm sorry that you're experiencing that. A lot of times out of home placement is helpful because she can't she can't feel loved, safe, secure, and valued because her brain won't let her with that kind of challenge. So I'm sorry.
We have time for one more question.
Okay.
And that is, what is the one thing that you would want every care partner here to leave with tonight?
Um, it is so empathetic to learn to think for them, don't ask questions, um, and to understand that there is purpose and meaning. And when we start to learn to think for them and how that changes the whole dynamic, we can have more meaningful moments together.
Thank you so much, Laura. This was really wonderful.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. And you can email me or you can get through Julie or Lynn if there's other questions. Like I said, I have my resources, my book, my website, laurawayman.com. There's my podcast. Please reach out. Let's stay connected because I learn something new every day. And I've been doing this for 30 years. You all mean so much to me. You're so amazing. And I learn from you on how to help the next person and the next person and the next person. So thank you.
Would you be able to share your slides so that we can send them out to folks?
Yes, I will send those tomorrow to Julie in email.
That would be perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
And early on, we had talked about the possibility of having some of your books available on our website for sale
Mhm.
with a signed copies. Does that still make sense to you?
Absolutely. We can talk about how we could get that done. I would
Okay.
have to have them mailed to me and then they'd come to you. But that's usually how people buy my books, anyways. They usually buy them through my website, and they're signed that way. So,
Okay.
but
That's awesome.
let's talk about how we can get that done. I would love to share that, and I will donate one book for just having me on today. So, however you would like to give everybody who's on tonight the opportunity, maybe do a little drawing or something, and then you let me know where to send one book.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Love to everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
So, everyone, just so that you know, next month we will be having Joyce Beadle, who is our dementia educator from Portland, who will be talking about when the relationship changes. And while you're thinking about seeing that presentation, remember that in May, on May 15th, we will have a full day workshop featuring Joyce Beadle in person. So again, thank you, Laura, so much. We've
Thank you,
all learned a
everybody.
lot.